rescue sphere was already rising when I understood I was the only man in it. I had my hands flat against the cold steel and my knees drawn up, and there was water on the floor of it, an inch of black water sliding side to side with the rise. And below me, through the little quartz port, the light was coming up, out of the trench. Not toward me, up past me, the way a thing swims up past a diver when it has decided he is not worth the trouble. The Corliss was gone under that light. Silas Bell was gone, and Amos Kerr, and the boy Voss who had wanted so badly to hear what it was saying, and Wendell Straw who had told us not to answer it and had gone out on the tether anyway. All of them gone, down there in the part of the ocean that has no bottom a man can stand on, and me going up alone with water in my shoes and a voice in the hull that was not coming through the phone. "Come deeper," it said, in my father's voice, the way it had said it the first time, when I was 9 years old and standing on a dock and did not yet know the word for what I was hearing. I did not go deeper. That is the one thing I know for certain about that night. I went up. The sphere rose past the layer where the light lives, and the light did not follow, and the gauges came back, and the sound-powered phone crackled, and a man on the Pruitt was saying my name, and I rose into the gray Pacific morning, the only living thing off Project Long Sound. A man was saved. That could be the end of it. It is not. I have spent the years since trying to work out whether the man they pulled out of that sphere is the man who went down in it, and I have not been able to, and neither has anyone else, because no one else knows to ask. In the spring of 1961, I was 34 years old, and I was a marine biologist by training and an acoustician by accident, which is a thing that happened to a lot of us in those years. I had come up through a state college on the Gulf Coast, and a doctorate I finished on a small grant studying the sounds that fish make, which everyone thought was a joke of a subject, until the Navy decided it was not a joke at all. Fish make sound. So do shrimp, in numbers that will white out a hydrophone. So does the water itself, and the ice of the deep plates grinding, and the whales that talk to each other across 1,000 miles of open ocean in a register a man can feel in his back teeth. I had spent my working life learning to tell one of those sounds from another, and in 1959 a man in a plain suit came to my office and asked me whether I would like to do that same work somewhere the Navy would rather I not describe to my wife. His name, or the name he gave, was Hollis. I never learned what he was. He was one of the quiet men, and I did not know yet that they were a kind of thing a man learns the shape of only after they have closed over him. The program was called Long Sound, and the short version of what it was is that the Navy wanted to sit on the bottom of the sea and listen. Not from a ship. Ships are loud, and a ship on the surface hears the ocean the way a man in a house hears a conversation 2 rooms away. They wanted a listening post on the floor of the deep water itself, a manned station, wired for sound, sitting in the quiet under the pressure where the ocean keeps its own counsel. There were reasons for it that had to do with the other side and their boats, and those reasons were real, and the men who built it were not fools, and they were not villains. They were engineers doing a hard thing well. What they did not know, what none of us knew, was that the quiet under the deep water is not empty. It is only quiet the way a field is quiet, when the thing in it has gone still to watch you cross. The station was the Corliss. Officially it was Deep Station 1, and no one called it that. It was a sphere of forged steel 4 inches thick, with a smaller sphere of titanium nested inside it, and it sat on the floor of a fold in the trench that the survey called the Vane Deep, after a lieutenant commander named Vane who had run the first soundings, and who had the good sense to die of ordinary causes before any of the rest of it happened. The Vane Deep is a pocket at the edge of the greater trench, off the main axis, and the number on the chart for our depth was one I still do not like to say. Call it 7 miles of water. Call it more black overhead than there is sky. The sun has never once touched the floor of the Vane Deep, and it never will, and a man who has spent time down there stops thinking of the sun as a thing that is up there waiting for him, and starts thinking of it as a rumor. We got down there in a thing that was half diving bell and half bathyscaphe, lowered on a cable from the tender pruit and mated to the corliss by a trunk we crawled through on our bellies. Once we were in the corliss, we were in it. The mating trunk could be sealed and cast off in an emergency, and the corliss itself carried the rescue sphere, a smaller ball rigged to blow its ballast and rise free of the station if everything else failed. We drilled that. We drilled it until we hated it. Bell made us drill it in the dark with the lights killed because he said the day we needed it, the lights would be the first thing to go. And Bell was right about that, the way he was right about most things, which did none of us any good in the end. There were 5 of us on the bottom rotation the spring it happened. The men are the only part of this I can still stand to look at directly. Silas Bell was the officer in charge, a lieutenant, Navy, a lean, quiet man out of Maine who had done submarine time in the war and had the submariner's way of moving through a small steel space without ever quite touching the walls. Bell did not raise his voice. Bell had a way of going more still and more quiet the worse a thing got, and by the end he was so still and so quiet that being near him was like standing next to a held breath. He kept a photograph of a woman and 2 girls taped inside the door of his locker, and he never once mentioned them, and I never once asked. And I have thought since that those 2 girls are grown women now who were told their father died of the unpredictable nature of the deep ocean, and that this is a true sentence in the way that a stone is a true answer to a question about bread. Amos Kerr was the chief, our engineer, the man who kept the corliss alive. He was a big gray Scot from by way of the Norfolk yards, with hands like a catcher's mitts and a genius in them, and he loved that station the way some men love a difficult dog. Kerr talked to the machinery. He would stand at the scrubber panel with a wrench in his hand and mutter at the carbon dioxide plant like it was a horse he was gentling, and the plant ran better when he was down than when he was up, and no one ever explained that, and no one wanted to. Kerr was the one who first said out loud that something outside the hull was pushing on us on purpose. He said it the way he would have reported a bad weld. He was not a man given to fancy, and that is exactly why it went through all of us like cold water when he said it. Gideon Voss was the sonar rating, and Voss was a boy. He was 23, and he should not have been down there, and he was the best natural ear I ever worked beside. Some men see, and some men hear, and Voss heard the way a bird dog smells. He could sit at the stack with the phones on his head for 6 hours without moving and tell me there was a fault slipping 40 miles off before the geophone twitched, tell me a whale had changed its mind about its heading, tell me the tender screw had picked up a nick in one blade. When the signal came, Voss was the one who found it, and Voss was the one it took first, in the way that mattered, long before it took the rest of him. He wanted so badly to understand it. That was the whole of him. He wanted to understand it, and it let him think he was going to, and that is the cruelest thing I have ever seen happen to a person, and I have seen some things. And Wendell Straw was our diver. Every deep station carried a hard hat man for the work outside the hull, and ours was Straw, and Straw was old for it, past 50, which in that trade is ancient. He had dived Pearl, and he had dived Salvage, and he had dived on the war wrecks, pulling the drowned out of hulls in the Solomons, and there was nothing left in the water that could surprise him, or so I believed until it did. Straw was the one who knew things. Every one of these accounts has a man in it who knew, and ours was Straw, and I did not listen to him, and a good part of what I have left is the memory of not listening to Wendell Straw. There was a 6th man in the story who was never on the bottom with us, and that was my father. My father was a diver too. That is not a coincidence, and I have made my peace with the fact that it is not, though it took me a long time. His name was Emmett Rourke, the same as mine, and he worked the Gulf and the Keys in the years before I was born and after, hard hat and later the shallow oil work. And he was a hard, flat, quiet man who came home smelling of rubber and brass and the inside of a helmet, which is a smell like a warm penny held in a wet hand. When I was 9 years old, my father took a job that he did not talk about, a deep job, deeper than his ordinary work, on a barge out past the shipping lanes, and he was down a long time on that job, longer than he should have been, and something happened to him down there that no one ever named to me. I know only this much of it. I was on the dock the day they were working him, because my mother had brought me out in the skiff to see the barge, and there was a man with a set of headphones and a hand-crank telephone that ran down the air hose to my father's helmet, and I was allowed to hold one side of the phones against my ear. And for most of an hour I listened to my father breathe and count and call his depth in the flat bored voice divers use to keep their nerve. And then, near the end, in the middle of a sentence about the mud, my father stopped, and there was a long stretch of the hose static, the sea hiss that comes up a dive line. And then a voice came up the line that was my father's voice and was not a voice using his mouth the way a man uses a borrowed tool, and it said 2 words to the man on the phones and to me and to the flat gray gulf. Come deeper. They pulled him up fast after that, too fast, and he was sick for a month with the bends and something that was not the bends, and when he came back to himself he was a smaller man than he had been. He never dived again. He never spoke of it. He lived another 20 years, my father, quiet and gray in a chair by a window that looked at the water, and he loved me in the closed, careful way of a man who has learned that the things a man loves are hostages. And he died the year before I went to work for Long Sound, and I did not tell him where I was going because I already knew what he would have said. He would have said, "Do not answer it." He would have said it because Wendell Straw was going to say it to me 8,000 fathoms down, and because somewhere in the low animal part of me I had already heard it said once, on a dock, when I was 9, in my father's stolen voice. I did not make the connection then. When I signed on to Long Sound, I was a scientist, and I thought of my father's bad dive the way a scientist thinks of an anecdote, a piece of family weather, a thing that had shaped me the way a hard winter shapes a tree, without the tree knowing the winter's name. I thought I was going to the bottom of the sea to listen for submarines. I brought my instruments and my training and a photograph of my own, my wife Nora, and our boy, who was 6 that spring, and I went down the cable into the dark thinking I was the safest kind of man there is, the kind who understands what he is looking at. The last morning at home before I went out to the ship is a thing I have kept whole and unworn all these years, taken out so carefully and so often that a man would think it would have gone thin like a photograph handled too much, and it has not. It is the one thing in me that has not, and I have come to believe that is because it belongs to the man who went down and not to me, that it is his and I am only its keeper, and that a thing a man is keeping for someone else he does not wear out. It was early and the light was coming into the kitchen the way it does on the Gulf in spring, thick and yellow and full of the smell of the water a few streets over, and Nora was at the stove in her robe with her hair still down, and the boy was under the table with a fleet of bottle caps he was pretending were boats, running them along the linoleum and making the engine sounds low in his throat. I had my bag packed by the door, and I got down on the floor under the table with my son in my good clothes, because I was not going to see him for the better part of a year and I wanted to be down where he was. And he showed me his boats, and he told me which one was the fast one and which one was the one that always sank, and he made me take the one that always sank, and we ran them along the floor together. And Nora looked down at the 2 of us under her kitchen table, and I heard her set the pan off the heat so it would not burn while she watched us. I have run that bottle cap along 10,000 floors since, in my mind, the one that always sank, my boy pushing it into my hand with his whole face serious, giving me the one that sinks, keep it safe, Daddy, and me taking it, and the light coming yellow through the window over the sink, and Nora watching, and the water a few streets over lying quiet and bright and patient the way it lies quiet and bright and patient outside this window now. That is what I went down from. That is the shore the thing in the deep called me away from, and it is the shore I have not been able to get back to in 50 years, because the man who ran that boat along the floor did not come home, and the one who did has been running it along the floors of an empty house ever since, correctly, keeping it safe for a boy who grew up and moved to the dry middle of the country to get away from the water and from me. The descent to the Corliss took the better part of a day. We went down from the Pruitt in the mating vehicle, the half-bell and half-bathyscaphe, 3 men at a time, folded into a space the size of a closet, and the cable let us down through the water in stages. And the thing I remember of the descent, the thing every man who made it remembers, is the light going. For the first few hundred feet it was the ordinary blue of the sea, and I could watch it deepen. Then the blue got darker and colder, and there was a while where it was a blue there is no name for, a blue that is nearly gone, and then it went, all at once it seemed, though it was not all at once, and we were in the black, and the black was total, and it stayed total for hours as the cable paid out, and there was nothing to see through the little port but my own reflection and the odd cold spark of some living light going by, a jelly, a fish with its own lamp, a rope of light that pulsed once and was gone. And I understood in my body, in a way no desk had ever taught me, that we were going down into a place that has never once known the sun, that the sun is a thing that happens 7 miles up to a world a man has left, and that the pressure was building on the walls around us the whole way down, patient, even, adding itself pound by pound, so that by the time I felt the bell settle onto the skirt of the corliss and made up with a clang that went through my teeth, I had already been listening to the sea lean on the hull for 6 hours, and I had already stopped, somewhere in the black, believing all the way that it would let me rise again. The corliss on the inside was not large. 2 spheres of living space stacked, the lower for the machinery and stores, and the upper for the men and the watch. A man learned to move in it the way he learns to move in a submarine, which is to say he stopped noticing that he could touch both walls, and started noticing only when he could not, which never happened. There was the smell of it, which I can bring back whenever I want to, and mostly want not to. Hot electronics and cold steel, and the sweetish chemical breath of the carbon dioxide scrubber, and under all of it the faint iodine reek of the sea coming off the trunk seals, because no matter how good the seals are, the sea is always just on the other side of 4 inches of steel, reminding a man it is there. There was the sound of it, the fans and the scrubber and the small talk of the instruments, a sound a man stopped hearing on the second day, and would have died of fright if it had stopped. There was the light, which was our own, hard and yellow, and never off, in the one round window. The window was a cone of quartz 9 inches across at the inner face, thick as my forearm is long, and it looked out onto the floor of the vein deep, and for the first week I could not keep away from it. We ran lamps outside on the station's skirt, and their light reached perhaps 60 feet into the water before the black ate it, and in that little bowl of yellow I saw the floor of the world. It was a soft, gray-brown ooze, flat, older than anything, the slow rain of every dead thing in the ocean above, laid down grain by grain for 100 million years. And it lay there undisturbed and level as a tabletop except where our own skirt had stirred it. Things lived on it. Not many, and not often, but I would see them. A sea cucumber, like a translucent sausage feeling its way along, a fish with no eyes worth the name, and a light of its own hanging off a stalk over its mouth. Once, a thing I never identified that was mostly a mouth and mostly transparent, and that hung in the lamplight for a moment and then folded itself sideways and was gone. I loved it. God help me, that first week I loved it. I was a boy from the Gulf who had spent his life studying the sea from its skin, and I was down in its heart at last, and it was showing me its secrets. And I wrote pages, and I slept like a child, and I did not yet understand that the window worked both ways. Wendell Straw understood. Straw did not like the window. I caught him more than once standing near it with his back half to it, the way a man stands with his back half to a dog he does not trust, and one night early on I asked him about it, made a joke of it, asked whether 50 years in the water had finally given him a fear of the dark. He did not laugh. He looked at the window for a while, and then he looked at me and he said a thing I wrote down that night, because it snagged in me, and I have the notebook still, and the line is this: "The deep water is the only place left on Earth," Straw said, "where you can still be looked at by something that was here first." I laughed it off. I was good at laughing things off that spring. It was the last spring I was ever any good at it. We had been on the bottom 11 days when Voss found the sound. He came off his watch that night and he did not go to his rack. That was the first wrong thing, and I did not read it as wrong, because Voss was young, and Voss was in love with his work, and a young man in love with his work keeps odd hours. He found me at the little fold-down table where I did my logs, and he stood there with the phone still around his neck and the cord trailing back to the stack, which meant he had walked as far as the cord would let him rather than take them off, and he said, "Doc, I want you to hear something." Everything that came after grew out of what it sounded like, and the words a man reaches for later are always bigger than the thing was at the time. At the time, it was small. Voss put one of the phones against my ear, and I listened, and under the wash of the deep water, under the shrimp and the far grind of the plates, and the hum of our own hull, there was a pulse. A soft low knock, and a space, and the knock again. It was not fast. A man could have counted a slow 4 between one knock and the next, and the knocks were even. That was all. That was the whole of the thing that killed 5 men. It was even biology, I said. Something calling a fish, a whale a long way off. Something we have not catalogued. Voss shook his head. He had the patience of a much older man when it came to sound, and he did not argue. He just reached back and did something to the stack, and the pulse came again. And this time he had it up on the paper, the stylus scratching the knocks out as little even peaks on the roll, and he laid a ruler along them. The spacing did not vary, not by a hair. A whale's call varies, a fish varies. The plates grinding vary most of all, because they are the sea tearing itself, and the sea is never regular. Nothing that lives makes a sound that even, and nothing that is only rock and water does either, because even is a thing a mind does. Even is a decision. Machinery, then, I said. Ours or theirs. A pump somewhere on the station cycling. Their boat. A long way off. Something running. We ran that down over the next 2 days, Voss and I was glad to run it down, because running it down was science, and science was a floor to stand on. We killed our own pumps one at a time, and the pulse stayed. We had Kerr shut the scrubber for the 90 seconds a man can stand to have it shut, and the pulse stayed. We took a bearing on it, or tried to, and this is the first thing that got in under my skin, because a man cannot take a clean bearing on it. Sound in the deep water bends. There are layers in the sea where the speed of sound changes, and sound rides those layers and comes to a man from a direction that is not the direction of the thing, and the deep water is full of these tricks, and I knew all of that. But every honest bearing we took put the source not out along the floor toward the open trench, where a boat or a fault would be, but down under us, below the station, in the ooze, in the rock, in the part of the vein deep that our own charts left blank because there was nothing down there to chart. The floor was the floor. There was no under. And it only lived below a certain depth. That was the second thing, and Voss found it. And I have thought since that if I had understood what he had handed me, I would have made Bell blow ballast that same night and take us all up into the light. Voss had the surface team on the Pruitt drop a sonobuoy chain. A string of hydrophones hung at intervals down from the surface, and he had them read him the pulse at each depth. And the top phones heard nothing. Clean water, the ordinary noise of the sea. And down the string there was still nothing, phone after phone. A mile down, 2 miles, 3, and then somewhere past 3 miles the pulse came in on one phone, faint, and on the next phone below it, clearer, and on the next clearer still, louder and surer the deeper the phone hung, so that whatever it was did not fill the ocean the way a whale fills it. It lived in a floor of the water. It had a ceiling. Above a certain depth, it simply was not there, the way a fish is not in the air, and below that depth it grew stronger all the way down to us, and we were as far down as anything the Navy had ever put a man in. So there was no telling how much stronger it got below us, in the no place, under the floor. I wrote in my log that night that the source appeared to be depth-bounded, and that this argued for a geological rather than a biological origin. That is what a floor to stand on will do for a man. It will let him write a calm sentence over a thing that should have had him clawing at the trunk hatch. I took it to Bell, because you took everything to Bell. He listened to the whole of it with his hands folded on the table and his eyes on the middle distance, and when I was done he asked 2 questions. He asked whether it could be their side, some new listening or ranging gear the other Navy had put on the bottom, and I said I did not think so, because nothing we knew how to build made a sound that even and did nothing else. And he asked whether it was a hazard to the station, and I said no, it was a sound. It was 3 miles of solid rock away from being able to touch us. It was the most harmless thing in the world. A sound cannot hurt a man. I believed that. I had built a career on the study of sound, and I believed to the floor of myself that a sound was a thing that happened to a man and left him as it found him. And I was wrong about that, wrong to the floor of me. And everything that came after grew out of how wrong I was. Bell thought for a while, and then he did the thing the program required, which was that he wrote it up, and he had Voss encode it, and we sent it up the wire to the Pruitt, and the Pruitt sent it on to wherever the quiet men kept themselves. And we went back to our watches and waited to be told it was nothing. We were not told it was nothing. We were told to record it. The order came back inside a day, which was fast. Faster than the program moved on anything, and it did not say what we expected it to say. It did not say disregard, continue primary mission. It said the anomalous acoustic source was of interest, and the station was to devote such resources as the officer in charge saw fit to characterizing it, and it was to be transmitted to the surface in full, continuously, and it was to be, and this is the word, the order used and the word. Bell read out flat and then read again. It was to be engaged. None of us knew what engaged meant. We found out. Wendell Straw knew before the rest of us. Straw had been quiet through the whole 2 days of running it down, quieter even than his usual, and when the order came back with that word in it, I saw a look go across his face that I had never seen on him. And I had seen Straw pull dead men out of a flooded compartment without changing color. He did not say anything in front of Bell, but that night he came and sat across from me at my little table, and he had his mug of the gray coffee we drank, and he turned it in his hands a while, and then he asked me if I knew what a decoy was. A duck decoy, I said. My father had a shelf of them. Straw nodded. He said his own father had carved them up in the marsh country he came from, and that the whole art of the thing was that it did not have to be a good duck. It only had to be enough of a duck, at a distance, in bad light, to a bird that wanted to believe there were other birds on the water. The rest, the bird did itself. The bird came down because it wanted the thing to be true, and Straw said that he had spent 50 years in the water, and that there were places in it, deep places, cold places, a few of them, where a man got the feeling he was the duck, where something down under the dark was showing him just enough of a thing he wanted to believe in, a light, a sound, a shape, a voice, and letting him do the rest. And that the smart old birds, the ones that lived, were the ones that had learned to feel that pull and turn the other way from it, no matter how badly they wanted to come down. I asked him, and I meant it kindly, whether he was telling me the pulse was a decoy. He said he was telling me it was even. He said even was the tell. He said the sea does not do even, and men do even, and there was a third thing in the world that did even, and he had felt it twice in 50 years, and both times he had turned the other way and gone home, and both times the man diving next to him had not, and both times he had gone to that man's funeral, if there was enough to bury. Then he said the thing I wrote down. He said, "That order tells us to answer it. You do not answer it. You do not so much as look at it too long. It is not asking a question it wants answered. It is asking to find out if you are the kind that answers." I told him I would keep it in mind. I was gentle about it. He was an old diver with old water stories, and I liked him, and I did not believe a word of it. And I thought the kind thing was to let him say it, and to file it under the folklore of men who work in dangerous places, which is a rich folklore and mostly true in the way that matters, and mostly false in the way I cared about. I went to sleep that night untroubled. That was the last time I did anything untroubled. The trouble started with the gauges the next morning, if it was morning. We kept ship's time down there, a clock and a watch bill, because without them the mind comes loose from the day, but it was a fiction, and we knew it was a fiction. And the trouble started at what the clock called a little after 4 in the morning, when Kerr woke Bell and Bell woke the rest of us, because the pressure was wrong. Not much wrong. That was the horror of all of it in those first days, that nothing was ever much wrong, that everything sat just at the edge of a thing a man could explain. The pressure the Corliss carried outside its hull was a fixed and enormous number, the weight of 7 miles of ocean, and it did not change, could not change. The sea down there is as steady as anything in the world, and Kerr's gauges said it was changing, only a little. It would climb a few pounds over a quarter hour and sit, and then ease back, and then climb again, slow, in a rhythm. And Kerr had been watching it for an hour before he woke anyone because he did not believe it, and the reason he finally woke Bell was that he had timed it, the climbs and the eases. He had sat there with the sweep hand of his watch, and he had timed the pressure going up and coming down against the floor of the sea, and it was even a slow 4 count. It was breathing with the pulse. Kerr did not say it was breathing. Kerr said the external pressure was cycling in phase with the acoustic source, and that he could not account for it and did not like it. But I saw his big gray face in the yellow light bent over that gauge, and I knew what a man looks like when he has just seen a thing he built and trusted do something that things do not do, and I have never forgotten it. And I saw the same look go onto my own face in the black window glass an hour later, and I understood then, a little, what Straw had been trying to hand me. Something 3 miles down, under a floor that had no under, was knocking on the bottom of the world, and the world was knocking back, and we had been ordered to answer. To answer it, we had to make noise at it, and this is the part where I stopped being able to hide behind my training, because my training was the thing that led us in. Engaging the source meant transmitting toward it and reading what came back, and that was my department, mine and Voss's. We had a projector on the station skirt, a sound source we could drive with a signal of our own, meant for ranging, and the program wanted us to send tones down at the source and see whether it altered its pulse when we did. That is a reasonable thing to want. It is what I would have wanted before, at a desk, with the sea safely on the other side of a window that only looked out. So we sent a tone. Voss keyed a plain steady note down into the rock, held it 10 seconds, and cut it, and we watched the paper. For a slow 4 count, the pulse came as it always came, even, indifferent, and then it changed. It broke its rhythm for the first time in the 11 days we had been listening to it, and it put out 3 fast knocks where there had been 1 slow one, and then it went even again, but the even was faster now, the 4 count gone to a 3, as if we had gotten its attention and it had leaned a little closer to see what had touched it. Voss made a sound I will not forget, a small sound in the back of his throat, the sound a man makes when a thing he hoped for and did not believe in turns out to be true. He looked at me with his whole face lit up, and he said, "It hurt us, Doc. It hurt us," and it answered. I should have felt what he felt. A part of me did, the old part, the boy from the Gulf who wrote pages about a mouth in the lamplight, contact. The word every man in that line of work carries around like a coal he is afraid to look at directly. But most of me had gone cold, and the cold was Straw's voice in my head. It is asking to find out if you are the kind that answers, and it was my father in a chair by a window not talking about the water, and it was the plain fact that the thing had been sitting even and patient for God knows how long down there, and had come alert the instant we reached toward it, the way a thing comes alert that has been waiting a long time to be reached toward. We engaged it for 6 days. Those 6 days took a year off me, and they were all the same shape, the shape of a door opening an inch at a time. Every day we sent it more, and every day it gave us more back, and every day the more it gave us back was more like us. That was the direction the whole thing moved in, toward us. It was learning, and what it was learning was how to sound like the men who were talking to it. At first it only gave back our own tones, changed a little, the way a man hums a tune back to another to show he has heard it. Then it began to give back the shape of our transmissions before we sent them, which Voss swore was impossible and which the paper showed anyway. The source putting out the rhythm of a signal a half-second before Voss keyed it, so that either it was reading his hand on the key or it had learned the man well enough to know what he would send next. Then, on the 4th day, it gave us back a voice. Voss was on the phones, and I was at the table, and Kerr was at his panel, and I heard Voss go rigid in his chair, the little creak of it, and he pulled the phones off. his head slow, and held one out from his ear and turned the volume of the monitor up so the compartment could hear, and out of the speaker, wrapped in the hiss of the deep water, riding up out of 3 miles of rock, came a voice saying numbers, a depth and a bearing, in the flat board sing-song a man uses to read instruments, and the voice was Voss's own. It was Voss's voice reading a log entry Voss had transmitted 2 days before. Every man in the compartment looked at the boy sitting there with his mouth shut, and then looked at the speaker where his voice was still going, calm, reading numbers to us out of the bottom of the sea. Kerr crossed himself. I did not know he was a religious man. I found out he was in that moment, and I have wondered since whether it helped him at the end, and I hope it did. We ate together, still, in those days, at the little fold-down table, because Bell insisted on it. He said a crew that stopped eating together was a crew that had started dying, and he made us come to the table at the ship's clock hours whether we wanted the food or not, and mostly we did not want it. The food was the pressed and tinned and reconstituted stuff of the deep rotation, and none of it tasted of anything down there. The pressure or the fear had taken the taste out of all of it, but we came because Bell said to, and because the table was the last ordinary thing, and I watched the crew come apart at that table across those 6 days, slow, one meal at a time, and it was worse than any alarm because it happened in the middle of the most ordinary thing men do. Voss stopped eating first. He would come to the table, because Bell made him, and he would sit with his tray and move the food and not eat it, and he had that lit-up look, and he wanted to talk about nothing but the source, what it might be, how old, whether it was one thing or many, whether it had built the light or found it, and he talked about it the way a man talks about a woman he has decided to ruin himself over, and none of us could turn him off of it, and his hands had started to do a thing. He would tap the table with one finger, low and even, while he talked, a soft, slow knock and a space, and the knock again, and I do not think he knew he was doing it. And once Kerr reached over without a word and put his big hand flat over Voss's hand to stop it, and Voss looked down at the two hands like he could not think whose the tapping one was, and for a second there was something in the boy's face that was not the boy, a flatness, a patience, and then it passed, and he laughed and pulled his hand back and apologized. And Kerr looked at me down the table, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say that would not make the compartment smaller than it already was. Straw ate. I will say that for the old man. Straw ate every meal Bell put in front of him, methodically, the way a man does a chore, and I understood later that he was doing it on purpose, that he was holding on to the ordinary with both hands, because he knew better than any of us what was pulling on the other end, and that eating was his way of turning the other from it, one tray at a time. And he kept an eye on Voss the way a man minds a young dog near a road. And once, at the table, in the quiet, Straw said a thing to the whole compartment without looking up from his tray. He said, "My grandmother used to say, 'Do not thank a thing that helps you out of the water that you did not ask for help from.'" And Bell said, "What does that mean, Straw?" And Straw said, "It means when a strange hand comes up out of the dark under you and offers to lift you, the question is not, is the hand strong? The question is, what does the hand want to do with a man once it has him up where he cannot swim, and he ate another bite, and nobody said anything else. And I have thought about the strange hand coming up out of the dark more nights than I can count, because that is exactly what it did in the end. A hand came up out of the dark under all of us and lifted one man up where he could not swim, and I was the man, and I have never stopped wondering what it wanted to do with me once it had me. And I am afraid the answer is that it wanted exactly this. An old man by a window, doing it correctly for 50 years, keeping the appointment, and that it has already done to me the whole of what it came up to do, and that I am not the aftermath of it at all, but the middle of it, still going on, still being done, in a quiet house, in the last of the light off the water. We should have stopped, and I take my share of that. There was a meeting, if 5 men and a steel ball can be called a meeting, and Straw said stop, said it hard. said we had gone past the place where turning around was easy and were coming up on the place where it was not possible, and Kerr stood with Straw, and I stood in the middle where I always stood, which is the coward's ground, and I know it now. Bell heard us all out. And then Bell said the thing that I have turned over more nights than I can count, because it was not a stupid thing and it was not a weak thing. It was the exactly reasonable thing that a good man says right before the reasonable world comes apart in his hands. Bell said, "We do not have the authority to stop." He said the order was to engage and characterize, and that his read of a contact of this significance was that the men who gave that order needed to be the ones to call it off, and that he would put our concerns up the wire in the strongest terms and recommend we break contact and surface, and that until they answered we would carry out the order, because that was the job. And the job was the only handrail any of us had down there, and he was not going to be the one to let go of it. And he was right that it was the job. And he was wrong that the men up the wire would ever call it off, because I understand now what I did not understand then, that the men up the wire wanted exactly this, wanted contact, wanted the thing that answered, and would have fed us all down that hole one at a time to get a clearer recording of its voice, and did. Bell put our concerns up the wire that night. The answer came back the next day, and it was signed Hollis, and it did not use the word stop. It used the word proceed, and it added a line that went through the compartment like a cold draft, because it asked for something we had not offered and had not known they would ask. It directed that a diver be put outside the hull to place an instrument package as near the source aperture as could be safely reached, and to attempt direct observation, and it used that phrase, direct observation, as if there were a thing down there with a face a man could see if he got close enough to it, and God forgive them, they were right about that too. The missing time started in those 6 days, and it is the part I understand least and fear most, and it is the hinge the whole of the rest turns on. It started with Voss. On the 5th day, Voss came off a 6-hour watch, and Kerr, relieving him, found the log gone strange. A watchstander logs the hour, marks his tape, notes the state of the plant, all of it timed, and Voss's log for that watch had a hole in it. 2 hours where the pen had not touched the paper. Not a gap where nothing happened, because a man notes when nothing happens, notes the nothing, that is the discipline. A hole. And when Kerr asked the boy about it, gentle, because we were all being gentle with Voss by then the way a man is gentle with someone standing too near an edge, Voss did not know what he was talking about. Voss remembered the whole watch. He remembered it hour by hour, and none of the hours were missing to him, and the tape said 2 of them were gone. And when Kerr showed him the tape, Voss looked at it a long time, and then he said a thing that I put in my log with my hand not quite steady. He said, "That is not possible. I was talking to it the whole time." And then he heard himself say it, and he looked frightened for the first time, not excited, frightened, and he said, "I do not remember what we said." After Voss, it was Kerr, 1 hour, at his own panel, a stretch he could not account for, and hated not being able to account for worse than any of us because he was the steadiest man aboard. And after Kerr, it was me. Mine came the night before Straw went outside. I was at the table with the phones on, doing a spectral analysis of the day's returns by hand, which is slow patient work, ruling lines and measuring peaks. Exactly the kind of work a mind cannot do while it wanders. I remember starting a sheet. The clock said, a little before 11 at night, and then I remember Kerr's hand on my shoulder and Kerr's voice a long way off saying my name, work, work, and I came up out of it like coming up out of deep water, and the clock said 1:15 in the morning, and the sheet in front of me was covered edge to edge in my own handwriting, close and small and even, and it was not analysis. It was 2 words, written over and over, filling the sheet, hundreds of them, in my own hand, in the patient even lines I rule my measurements in. Come deeper, come deeper, come deeper. I had not decided to write them. There is no one left who can tell me whether that is true, whether some part of me down under the part that decides things had picked up the pen and answered it the way my father answered it on a dock when I was 9. I sat and looked at the sheet, and the compartment was dead quiet, and Kerr was looking at it over my shoulder, and neither of us said anything for a while. And then I put my hand flat over the writing, as if I could keep him from reading a thing he had already read, and I said the only true thing I had, which was that I did not know I had done it. That was the night I told them about my father. I had to. The 2 words were on the paper in my hand, and there was a boy aboard writing the same kind of holes in his watch log, and I could not go on pretending to be the safe kind of man, the kind who understands what he is looking at, so I sat them down, Bell and Kerr and Straw, and I told them about the barge past the shipping lanes, and the hand-crank phone, and the flat gray gulf, and the voice that had come up my father's air hose using his mouth, and said those 2 words to a 9-year-old, holding one side of a set of headphones. I told them my father never dived again and never spoke of it, and died gray in a chair by a window that looked at the water. And I told them I had thought, when I signed on, that it was just family weather, a hard winter that had shaped me without my knowing its name, and that I did not think that anymore. Bell took it the way Bell took everything, still and quiet, and he asked me one question. He asked whether I had ever, in any transmission, in any log, in any word spoken aboard the Corliss on an open circuit, said my father's name or told the story, or given the thing anything of my father at all. And I said no. I was sure of it. I am sure of it still. There was no way for the sound in the rock to have gotten my father's voice, and it had my father's voice. I had heard it in the 2 words, in my own head as I read them off the page. And the only place in the world that voice existed was a dock on the Gulf, 25 years gone, and the closed gray room of my own memory. Straw said, "It did not get it off the wire." He said it low, into his coffee, not looking at any of us. "It got it off you. It has been in the compartment with us for days, in the pressure and the voices and the holes in the watch, and it does not need the wire. The wire is how you talk to it. It has found another way to talk to you." And then Straw set his coffee down and stood up, an old man unfolding himself in a low steel room, and he said he would go outside in the morning, because the order said a diver, and he was the diver, and he was not going to send the boy, and he was not going to let Kerr leave his plant, and he was damned if a scientist who had never worn a hard hat was going out on his tether. He said it plain, like the weather. And then he said one more thing to me, just to me, before he turned in, and it is the last ordinary conversation I ever had with Wendell Straw, and I have kept every word of it. He said, "When I am out there, work, no matter what you hear on the phone, no matter whose voice it is, you keep my tether in your 2 hands, and you count my minutes, and when the minutes are up, you bring me back, whether I say to or not, because it will use the phone. It will use a voice I trust to keep me out there past my air, and the only thing that will save me is a man on the other end who does not care what the voice says. Can you be that man?" I said I could. I could not, but I said I could, and I meant it. And Straw looked at me a moment and nodded like he had weighed me and decided I would do. And he went and slept his last ordinary sleep, and in the morning we dressed him for the water. Dressing a man for that water is a long, careful thing, and I was glad of the length of it, because it was work with our hands and it kept the compartment ordinary a while longer. The suit was a hard suit, an armored thing, jointed, meant to hold a man at 1 atmosphere inside, while the sea outside pressed on it with a weight that would fold an ordinary diver into paste. It went on in pieces, and each piece was checked twice, and Kerr did the checking because Kerr's hands were the surest aboard, and Straw stood in the middle of the compartment, growing heavier and stranger as we built the suit up around him, until at the end he was not quite a man anymore. He was a small submarine with a diver's eyes looking out of a dome, and his voice came to us through the sound-powered phone with the little hollow ring that a voice takes on down a wire. He went out through the lower trunk, into the flooded skirt, and then out onto the floor of the vein deep, tethered to the Corliss by a line and a phone cord and an umbilical that fed him power and heat, and the deal was simple and old and good. He walked out on the floor toward the source, paying out line. I sat at the phone with the tether in my 2 hands, exactly as he had told me, and I counted his minutes on the clock, and Voss set the sonar to track him, and to track the thing, and Bell stood behind me with his hands folded, and Kerr stood at his plant, and we let an old man walk alone across the oldest floor in the world toward a light none of us should ever have gone near. Because there was a light. That was the first thing Straw reported, and the first thing I saw with my own eyes when I put my face to the window, and it is one of the 2 or 3 images out of all of this that I would give a great deal to have taken back out of my head. Off past the reach of our own lamps, out where the yellow gave way to the black, the floor was glowing, not brightly, a low, even light. The color of nothing I have a clean word for, a color like the inside of my own eyelids when I pressed on them, and it did not flicker and it did not pulse the way a living light pulses. It lay there on the ooze in a broad, low patch, and it was even, and by then I had learned to be afraid of even. Straw walked toward it and told us what he saw as he went, in the flat report of a lifetime diver, and I wrote it down word for word, and I have it still, and only a little of it is mine to spend. We never saw it whole. No man saw it whole and lived, and what Straw saw he saw in pieces through a dome 9 miles down, with our lamps failing behind him. He said the light was not on the floor. He said the floor was gone. He said there was an edge where the ooze stopped, clean, a border, and past the border there was no bottom. There was the light coming up out of a depth, below the depth, and that the light had an inside to it, that there were shapes down in it, and that the shapes were regular. He said it was built, that whatever it was, it had been made, it had corners, and it had spans, and it had the look of a made thing, the way a cathedral has the look of a made thing, except that no part of it was a shape a man would have chosen, and that looking at the angles of it made the inside of his head feel wrong, tilted, like a floor that is not level under you in the dark. And then he stopped walking, and I felt it come up the tether. Not a pull, a slackening. A man walks with a certain tension on his line, and I had that tension in my 2 hands for 11 minutes, and in the 12th minute it went soft, the way a fishing line goes soft when the fish turns and runs in toward the boat, and Straw's voice on the phone changed. It lost the flat diver's report. It went young, almost, and warm, and he said, "Oh," he said, "Oh, it is beautiful," he said. I did not know it would be beautiful. And then the phone gave me a voice that was not Straw's. It came up the chord under his voice, the way a second voice comes up under the first on a bad telephone line, and it was warm and it was familiar and it was calling him by a name I did not know, a first name, a boy's name, and it was saying, "Come and see, come a little closer, come and see the whole of it." And I understood in the cold pit of me that it was using a voice Straw trusted, a voice from 50 years back, a mother or a brother or a wife long drowned, and that Straw was standing at the edge where the floor stopped with his line gone soft in my hands, and that he had 4 minutes of the safe margin left, and was about to spend them walking off the edge of the world toward a beautiful thing in a beloved voice. This was the moment. This was the exact moment Straw had built his whole warning around, the man on the other end of the line who does not care what the voice says. I was supposed to be that man. Count his minutes, bring him back whether he says to or not. That was the promise. What happened was that the voice on the phone changed again, while Straw's soft young "oh" was still hanging in the compartment, and it stopped being Straw's drowned beloved, and it became my father. Mid-word it became my father, the flat gray voice, out of the chair by the window, and it said, to me, not to Straw, to me, by my own name. It said, "Emmett, come deeper." And for a space of time I do not have and will never have back. I was not a man at a phone counting another man's minutes. I was 9 years old on a dock with one side of a set of headphones against my ear, and my father was down there. My father was really down there this time, not dead in a chair, but down there in the beautiful built light, waiting for me to come the way I had wanted him to wait for me, my whole gray, careful life, and the tether was in my hands, and I do not know whether I paid it out or held it. I do not know whether in that hole in my time I helped Wendell Straw toward the edge or away from it, and no one can tell me. because the two men who could are the boy Voss, who was watching the sonar and is gone, and Wendell Straw, who came back and was never able to say. Kerr brought him back. It was Kerr, not me. Kerr saw my hands go slack on the tether, the same way Straw's line had gone slack, saw me sitting there with my face gone loose and my mouth moving, and Kerr did not stop to understand it. Kerr took the tether out of my hands and set his own 2 mitts on it, and hauled, hand over hand, a big gray man hauling an armored diver back across the floor of the sea against the weight of a beautiful voice. And Bell got on the phone and cut the circuit and got Voss to kill the projector, and they dragged Wendell Straw back into the flooded skirt and cycled the trunk and got the suit off him, and I came up out of my hole somewhere in the middle of it with Kerr shouting and the alarm going and my father's voice gone and the 2 words still moving on my own lips. Straw was alive. His body was alive and unhurt. He had walked to the edge and stood at it and come back, and there was not a scratch on him. But something had been spent out of him out there in the minutes I cannot account for, and it did not come back with the rest of him. He sat on the deck with the suit off and his old chest heaving, and he looked at us one by one, and there was a gap in his eyes, a hole, the exact shape of the holes that had been showing up in our watch logs. And when Bell asked him what had happened at the edge, gently, Straw opened his mouth and worked it, and nothing came. And then he said the only thing he was ever able to say about it, which was, "I answered it." And then he began to weep, an old man weeping without any sound, which is the worst weeping there is, and none of us knew what to do. So Kerr sat down on the cold deck next to him and put one big arm around the wet shoulders of him and held on, and I sat where I was with my father's voice still cooling in my ears, and understood at last, all the way down, the thing that I had been refusing to understand since the 11th night. It was not a sound. It had never been a sound. The sound was only the hand it reached with. The thing itself was down in the built light past the edge of the floor, and it was old, and it was patient, and it had learned that the surest way to bring a man to the edge was to call him in a voice he loved, and it had been calling up out of the deep water for longer than there had been men to answer, and now it had 5 of us in a steel ball 9 miles down, and it had already gotten a hand into 3 of us, and the men up the wire had told us to proceed. We did not proceed. Whatever else I have to answer for, we did not proceed after that. Bell secured the projector and put a guard on it and got on the wire himself in the clear and told Hollis and whatever was behind Hollis that the diver was a casualty, that the crew was compromised, and that he was breaking contact and bringing the station up on his own authority as the officer on the scene. And Hollis said no. That was the beginning of the last night. Hollis came back on the wire himself, not a coded order this time, but his own dry voice riding down through 9 miles of water to a steel ball full of frightened men. And he was calm, and he was reasonable, and he was the most frightening thing I had heard all night, until the things that came after. He told Bell that he understood the officer on the scene had concerns. He told Bell that the concerns were noted, and he told Bell that the station would hold position and maintain contact, and that a relief crew and a specialist team were being readied on the surface, and that under no circumstances was the Corliss to break contact or surface, because the contact was of national importance beyond the authority of anyone aboard to judge, and that this was not a request. Bell asked him, in the flat voice, whether the men aboard were expected to be sacrificed to it, and Hollis was quiet for a moment on the wire 9 miles up, and then he said, "We are all of us expendable in the face of a thing like this, Lieutenant, and I include myself, and I include you." And he said it gently, and I believe he even believed it. I did not know at 34 what I know now about the quiet men. They are not cruel. Cruelty would be easier to forgive. They have simply decided, somewhere up the wire where the air is clean and the pressure is 1 atmosphere and the sea is a thing on a chart, that there are prizes worth any number of men. And they are right that such prizes exist, and they are wrong about nearly everything else, and the difference between those 2 facts is measured in funerals. Bell set the phone down. He stood a moment with his hand still on it, and then he did the bravest thing I ever saw a man do. which was a quiet thing. He turned to the four of us and he said, "We are surfacing." He said, "I am relieving myself of the order." He said, "Log it, Rourke. Log that the decision is mine and mine alone, and that the crew is under my direction against standing orders. And when this is looked into, and it will be looked into, that log will say I disobeyed, and it will not say any of your names." And then he told Kerr to begin the surfacing sequence, and Kerr said, "Aye," and turned to his plant with a light-like joy on his big gray face, and for about 10 minutes we were saved. We were not saved. We were only, for 10 minutes, men who had decided to save themselves, and I have learned to be grateful for those 10 minutes as a thing separate from what came after, because in them I watched 4 men choose each other over the order and over the prize and over their own fear. And that is a thing worth having seen even down there, even at the price. The thing in the deep water did not let us go, and the way it stopped us was the pressure. Kerr began the sequence, and the first step of the sequence was to shed the ballast that held us on the floor and let the station lighten toward its lift, and Kerr threw the levers and nothing happened. And Kerr threw them again and read his gauges, and his face changed, and he said the ballast would not release, and then he said, "Quieter, the pressure is holding it." The external pressure that had been cycling in its slow, even 4-count all these days had begun to climb, and it was not easing anymore. It was climbing and staying, pressing the station down onto the floor, pressing the ballast doors shut, pressing on 4 inches of forged steel with the patient, even weight of a thing that had decided we were not going anywhere. Kerr fought it. He fought it for an hour, with every trick in that plant, and he bought us nothing. And while he fought it, the light outside the window began to rise. I was at the window for that, and I wish I had not been. The low, even glow that had lain out past the reach of our lamps began to come up. The edge of it, the border where the floor stopped and the built light began, was moving toward us across the ooze, slow, even, and the light was getting stronger, and the shapes down inside it that Straw had called corners and spans were rising with it, coming up out of the depth below the depth, and I could not look at the angles of them. That is not a figure of speech. My eyes would go to the shapes and slide off them the way a foot slides off a stair that is not the height the body expected, and my stomach would drop the same way, and I would find myself looking at the ooze, or the rim of the window, or my own hands, anywhere but the shapes. And when I made myself look back, the light was closer. It was rising to meet us, or the floor was sinking under us. In the deep water, with the pressure climbing and the air going wrong, I could not tell which, and it did not matter, because the distance between the Corliss and the thing was closing, and there was no direction we could go. The air was going wrong by then. That was Kerr's other war, and he could not fight both. The carbon dioxide plant, the scrubber that took our own breath back out of the air so it would not poison us, had begun to fail in the climbing pressure, or in the thing's reach, or in both. And the compartment was filling slowly with the flat, headachy staleness of air that has been breathed too many times. A man does not notice it at first. That is the danger of it. It comes on as a headache, and a slowness, and a kind of drunk calm, and it makes the mind stupid and dreamy and willing, and I have thought since that the thing knew exactly what bad air does to a man, and that it was not an accident that the scrubber failed on the last night, that the thing had learned we were easier to reach when we could not think, and reached in and turned our own air against us. We put on the emergency rigs, the little rebreathers, but there were not enough good hours in them, and we knew it, and the knowing sat in the compartment with us like a sixth man. And the voices came, all of them, now, all at once. The thing had spent 6 days learning us off the wire and off our own minds, and now it spent what it had learned, and the compartment filled with the voices of everyone we had ever loved. Kerr's plant began to speak to him in the voice of a woman, and I saw him go gray and set his jaw and keep working, muttering back at the plant the way he always had, except that now the plant was answering in a voice that made the big man's eyes run while his hands stayed sure. Voss sat at his dead sonar with the phones on, though there was nothing left to hear but the thing, and the thing poured into the boy's ears, whatever it was pouring, and Voss began to smile, and the smile was the worst thing in the compartment. Bell stood at the center of it all, still, quiet, and whatever voice it used on Bell he never told us, and never showed us. He only went stiller and quieter and grayer. And once I saw his lips move, and I believe he was praying, and I believe he was praying for his two girls, and I hope to God the thing did not use their voices on him, but I believe that it did, because at the end, Bell moved toward the trunk once, one step, toward the water, with his face turned up like a man hearing his children call him from another room, and then he stopped himself. And I saw what it cost him to stop himself, and he did not step again. Bell was the strongest of us. Bell held. We were still tied to the surface through the worst of it, and that was its own kind of cruelty, on them more than on us. The sound-powered phone up the cable to the Pruitt still worked, up past the ceiling of the thing where the water went ordinary, and there were men up there in the warm night on the deck of the tender, ordinary Navy men with the stars out and a mug of coffee going cold on a rail, who could hear us. Bell kept the circuit open at the end. I think he did it so there would be a witness, so that whatever the quiet men buried, there would be a handful of sailors on the Pruitt who had heard it with their own ears, and would carry it around the rest of their lives. And I have wondered since whether that was a kindness or the opposite, to hang that on those men. And I have decided Bell knew what he was doing, because Bell always knew what he was doing, and that he wanted the world to have heard, even if only through the ears of 6 enlisted men who would be told to forget it and would fail, the way I have failed, the way a man cannot help but fail to forget a thing like that. The last thing that went up the cable was Bell's voice, flat and quiet and clear, reading off the crew. He did it like a muster. He said the station was lost and the crew was lost, and he named us, each one rank and name and next of kin, slow, so the man topside writing it down could get it right. He named Kerr, and where Kerr's family was in Norfolk. He named Voss and the mother in Ohio. He named Straw and said next of kin none, and there was a space on the line after that, a space I have never gotten out of my ears. And he named me, and he said next of kin, wife and one son, and then he said tell them, and there was another space, and whatever Bell had meant to have them tell my wife and my son, he could not find the words for it, or the thing came for him in that space, because he never finished it, and the next voice on the line was not Bell's. It was mine, or it was the thing wearing mine, saying the two words up the cable to the men on the Pruitt in the warm night under the stars, "Come deeper." And a sailor 200 miles up, God help him, a boy who had drawn the worst watch of his life, keyed his handset and said, "Back down the cable," in a voice gone high with fear. "Say again, Corliss, say again your last," and got no answer, because by then whatever was going to happen in the whole of my time was already happening, and the man who could have answered him was gone, one way or the other, up or down. I do not know all the order of what happened next. The bad air and the holes in my time have taken the order of it, and what I have is not a sequence. It is a handful of lit rooms with dark between them, and I have spent years trying to put the rooms in a line, and I cannot swear to the line. Here are the rooms. Voss went first. There was a lit room where Voss stood up from the sonar with the phone still on and the cord pulling tight and then popping free of the stack, and he was smiling, and he said, It wants to show me how it works." And he walked to the lower trunk, and Kerr tried to stop him, and Voss was gentle about it. He put his hand on Kerr's chest almost kindly, and he said, "It is all right, Chief, I understand it now." And he cycled himself into the flooded skirt, alone, with no suit, a boy of 23, to go and hear it clean. Bell got the inner hatch shut before the skirt flooded back into us. Through the little port in the trunk hatch, I saw Voss in the flooded skirt for a moment, in the failing lamplight. And he was not thrashing, he was not drowning the way a man drowns. He was walking out onto the floor, toward the risen light, with the last of the air coming up out of him in a silver rope, walking calm and glad into the thing that had promised to show him how it worked. And then the lamp that lit the skirt died, and there was only the built light, and Voss walked into it, and I did not see him again. There is a dark space, and then a lit room where the hull is screaming. The pressure took a plate somewhere below in the machinery sphere, and the sea came into the lower level, and Kerr was down there. Kerr had gone down to fight for us to the last, and the sea took the lower level with Kerr in it. and the last of Kerr was his voice coming up the intercom, not frightened, angry, a big Scot swearing at the ocean the way he had spent his whole life swearing at machinery, telling it to come on then, come on. And then the intercom went to water and Kerr was gone, and he had bought us with his death. The minutes it took the automatic doors to seal the flood below, and those minutes were the minutes I lived on, and I have tried to be worth them, and I do not think any man could be. There is a dark space, longer, and then the last lit room I have before the hole, and it is Bell putting me into the rescue sphere. The rescue sphere would take one man. That was its design, one man, the smallest ball rigged to blow free and rise, and there were 3 of us left, Bell and Straw and me, and Straw was hollow and weeping and could not walk himself, and Bell was the officer and would not leave the station while it lived, and so it came down to which of the 2 whole men would go, and Bell decided it the way Bell decided everything, fast and quiet and without any room in it for argument. He took me by the front of my rig with both hands, close, his gray still face right at mine, and he said, "You are the one with the recordings, Rourke. You are the one who can tell them what it does. You get up there and you tell them what it does, and you do not let them come back down here for it." And he pushed me at the sphere hatch, and I fought him. I did not want the sphere. I tried to give it to Straw, and Bell would not have it. "Straw's gone already," he said. "Look at him." And I tried to stay, and Bell would not have that either. And the last clear thing in the last lit room is Bell's 2 hands on me and Bell's flat voice saying my name, "Emmett, go." And behind him Wendell Straw sitting against the curved wall with the built light from the window on his wet face, looking not at me and not at Bell, but at the window, at the risen light, with a gap in his eyes and an ease almost like peace coming into the ruin of his face. An old man finally being allowed to answer the thing he had turned away from twice in 50 years. And then the hole. I have nothing in the hole. I have looked for it every day of my life since, and there is nothing in it. Not darkness. Darkness is something. There is nothing. The way there is nothing before a man is born. On the near side of the hole, Bell is pushing me toward the sphere hatch with the light rising in the window and Straw turning his ruined face up to it. On the far side of the hole, I am in the sphere, and it is already rising, and there is an inch of black water on the floor of it sliding side to side with the rise, and my knees are drawn up and my hands are flat against the cold steel, and I am the only man in it, and I do not remember getting in, and I do not remember blowing the ballast, and I do not remember the hatch closing over me, and I do not remember whether Bell was still alive when it did, and I do not remember whether I went out through the trunk first, out onto the floor, to the edge, the way Voss went, and the way Straw wanted to go, and came back, and got in the sphere. I do not remember whether I answered it. That is the whole of the whole. A man went toward a rescue sphere with a light rising in the window, and a man rose in a rescue sphere with the light falling away below, and I have never been able to prove to myself that they were the same man, and there is water on the floor of everything I have thought since. The sphere rose. Whatever had happened in the hole, the sphere rose, and the rising is the one mercy in the whole account, because the rising followed the rule. Voss had found the rule on the 11th day, and none of us had understood it was a door out, and it was. The thing lived below a certain depth, and above that depth it was not there, and the sphere came up through the black on its blown ballast, up and up, faster than was safe, and somewhere in that long rise it passed the ceiling of the thing, the layer where the light lives, and everything changed at once. The pressure on the little gauge fell into the normal. The dead sound-powered phone crackled and hissed and became an ordinary phone again, and the voice that had been in the hall with me the whole rise, my father's voice, close, patient, saying the 2 words over and over, come deeper, as if it had not yet noticed I was going the wrong way. The voice stopped, not faded. Stopped, clean, the way a sound stops when a door is shut on it, at the exact depth where Voss's top phones had heard nothing. And I rose the rest of the way through ordinary water and ordinary silence with my own breath loud in my ears and my hands flat on the steel, and I remember thinking, in the drunk, stupid calm of the bad air I had brought up with me, that my hands did not feel like my hands, that they felt like tools I was holding, that I was inside them the way a diver is inside a suit, working them from somewhere a little behind and above, and that this was probably the bad air, and that it would pass. It did not pass. But I did not know that yet. I only rose into the gray Pacific morning, the only living thing off Project Long Sound, with water in my shoes, and my father's voice finally quiet, and my own 2 hands held out in front of me in the growing light, looking at them, wondering why they looked like something I had put on. They came off the Pruitt in a launch and got the sphere alongside and cracked it, and there were faces looking down into it at me, ordinary sunburned Navy faces, a young corpsman and a bosun and a lieutenant I did not know, and they were saying things at me. Are you hurt? Can you move? What is your name, sir? Can you tell me your name? And I looked up at them out of the little steel ball with the water sliding around me, and I could not for a moment think what my name was. That was the first thing. And they wrote it down as shock, and the bends, and the bad air, and they were not wrong too. Those are all real, and I had all 3, but that is not why I could not think of my name. I could not think of my name, because when they asked it, the first thing that rose up in me to answer with was not a name, it was the 2 words. I felt them come up my throat the way they must have come up my father's air hose, and I shut my teeth on them hard, and held them behind my teeth, and after a moment the bad air let go of me enough that I could find the ordinary answer, and I said, Rourke, Emmett Rourke. And the corpsman said, Good, that is good, sir, we have got you, and they lifted me out into the light. I nearly died of the ascent. This fear had brought me up far too fast, there was no helping it, and my blood was full of the gas that fast water forces into a man, and I spent 9 days in a decompression chamber on a tender steaming for port, being brought down slow to the pressure of the world, and I was sick as I have ever been, and part of me hoped in those 9 days that I would die, because I had begun to understand what had come up in the sphere, and I did not want to carry it back to Nora and the boy. But I did not die. Whatever I was by then, it was hard to kill, harder than the man I had been, and I have thought since that this too was a gift I did not want, that the thing that comes back is always a little harder to kill than the thing that went down, because it has already been to the place where killing happens and it did not stay. The quiet men were waiting when they brought me ashore. There were 3 of them, and Hollis was one, and I never learned the names of the other 2. And they were kind to me, in the way the quiet men are kind, which is a kindness with no warmth in it, a kindness like a clean, well-lit room with no way out. They let me heal. They sat by my bed in the Naval Hospital, and they brought me the things a sick man wants, and they asked me, over many days, gently, everything. Everything. They had the recordings, all of it, the whole 6 days of the thing learning to be us, pulled off the wire on the surface as it happened, and they played pieces of it back to me and watched my face while it played, and I understand now that they were not only debriefing me, they were checking me. They were watching to see what my face did when the thing's voice came out of the speaker, and I did not know then what they were watching for, and I know now, because I have had a great deal of time to think about what a man like Hollis would need to know about a man who came up alone out of a place like that. He would need to know whether the right man came up. They knew. I settled into that slowly over the years, and have never been able to unsettle it. They knew that a thing lived at the bottom of the vein deep, knew it before they ever built the Corliss, because Long Sound was never about the other side's submarines, or it was about that the way a lie is about the small, true thing it is wrapped around. They had heard the even pulse years before, on some earlier listening gear, and they had wanted it, and they had built a manned station on top of it and staffed it with good men, and called it a listening post. And when the thing woke up and reached for us, they had ordered us to hold still and let it, because they wanted to see. And they had done it before. I am nearly sure they had done it before. that the Corliss was not the first thing they had lowered onto that floor, that there had been others earlier that went silent, that got written up as the unpredictable nature of the deep ocean, and that somewhere in a locked file there is a list of the men who went down for Hollis and his kind before me, and that my 5 are on the bottom of that list now, Bell and Kerr and Voss and Straw and the man I used to be. And they knew that sometimes a thing came back up. They must have known that, because of the way Hollis watched my face, because of the last thing he said to me at the base hospital when the debrief was done, and they had my whole account and the recordings were sealed and I was being sent home under a security oath, and I have broken it, because some things should outlive the men who buried them. Hollis stood at the foot of my bed with his hat in his hands, and he looked at me for a long moment, longer than was comfortable. The way a man looks at a word he is trying to decide whether he has spelled right. And then he said, "We are glad you came back, Rourke." And there was a question folded up inside the word came, so small that a well man might have missed it, and I was not a well man, and I did not miss it, and I held his eye, and I gave him nothing, because by then I had learned that I could give a man nothing across a room, while the 2 words sat quiet behind my teeth, and after a moment Hollis nodded, once, as if I had answered something, and put his hat on and went out, and I did not see him again for 11 years, though I felt him. I felt them keeping their quiet eye on me down all the years after, a car that sat too long across the street, a new man at a job who asked the wrong easy questions, a sense at the edge of things of being watched by people who wanted to know whether the thing they had let happen was going to surface, and it never did, and they never stopped watching. And I have made my peace with the fact that I will be watched until I die by men who suspect what came home to my family and can no more prove it than I can. The Navy held a board of inquiry, a real one, separate from the quiet men, staffed by officers who did not know what Long Sound really was, and were told only that a deep station had been lost with all hands but one. I sat in front of them in a bare room in my dress clothes, with my hands folded to keep them still, and I gave them the account the quiet men allowed me to give, which was most of the truth, with the shape cut out of the middle of it, a structural failure at extreme depth, a cascade of flooding, a crew that behaved with the highest courage, and a commanding officer, Lieutenant Silas Bell, who put his last surviving crewman into the rescue sphere with his own hands and stayed with his station. All true. All of it true. And the board wrote it down and thanked me and entered it as Incident 7144, and the finding was death by misadventure attendant to the hazardous nature of deep submergence operations. And they gave Bell a decoration that his 2 girls could hang on a wall, and they gave Kerr and Voss and Straw the same, and they gave me a medal too, for surviving, which is the strangest thing anyone has ever handed me, and which I have never once taken out of the drawer. And the file was sealed, and the program was quietly ended, or moved, or renamed, I never knew which, and the sea closed over the whole of it exactly the way the sea closes over everything, which is completely and without a mark and forever. Then they sent me home. Nora met me at the airfield with the boy. I had been gone the better part of a year, all told, the training and the rotation and the long slow climb back to one atmosphere and the debrief. And there she was on the tarmac in her good coat with our son on her hip, and the boy was 6 and had grown while I was down there the way children grow, so that the child I had left and the child on her hip were not quite the same child, and I have thought since that this was a mercy arranged for me, that I came home changed to a family that had also changed in my absence, so that the changes could hide in each other. Nora saw me and her face broke open, the way a face breaks open with joy and grief at once, and she came across the tarmac fast with the boy bouncing on her hip, and I opened my arms to her because that is what a man does, and she came into them, and I held my wife for the first time in a year, and I felt nothing. This is the center of everything, and it is easy to say wrong. It was not that I did not love her. I knew that I loved her. I had the whole of it, the memory of it, the shape of it. Every fact of my love for Nora was there in me, filed and complete. our first meeting and the church and the boy being born and 10,000 ordinary mornings. I knew that I loved her the way a man knows a thing he has read. What I did not have, standing on the tarmac with my wife in my arms and her tears going into my collar, was the feeling of it. The warmth that should have come up to meet her did not come up. I stood inside my own arms holding her, and I worked them gently, the way a man works a thing from a little behind and above, and I put my face down into her hair, and I made the sounds a man makes. And somewhere a little behind and above my own eyes, I watched myself do it and thought, this is how it is done. I am doing it correctly. She cannot tell. She could not tell. That is the horror I came home to and have lived in for the rest of my life, that she could not tell, that no one could tell, that I do it correctly. I have been a husband to Nora for all the years since, and I have done it correctly. I have been a father to my son, and then to the daughter who came after, who was conceived by a man doing it correctly, and God forgive me, I do not know what that makes her, and I have done that correctly too. I have laughed at the right times and grieved at the right times, and I have stood at the graves of my wife's parents, with my arm around her, doing the correct thing with my face, and not once, not in all the years, has anyone I love looked at me and seen the thing I am afraid I am, because I do it correctly. Whatever came up in that sphere, it came up with the whole of Emmett Rourke inside it, every memory and every habit and every fact of him, the way the thing in the deep had every fact of my father's voice, and it wears all of it correctly. And the only one who was ever suspected is me, and I cannot even be sure of me, because if the man who went down is gone, then the one who is suspecting is the thing. And a thing that can suspect itself of being a thing is a riddle I have not been able to climb out of in a lifetime of trying. There were smaller signs, and I collected them for years, the way a man collects anything he is afraid of, to keep it where he can see it. The cold. I do not feel the cold anymore, or I feel it as information, a number, the way a gauge feels the pressure. Nora will come in from the garden in October rubbing her hands, and I will not have noticed that the house went cold. I keep a sweater on the back of my chair, and I put it on when she puts hers on, because I learned early to watch her for the cues my own body stopped giving me. The water. My father sat gray in a chair by a window that looked at the water all the years after his bad dive, and as a boy I thought it was sadness, and it was not sadness. I know now what it was, because I do it too. I have moved my family 3 times in my life, and every time, without deciding to, I have moved us nearer the water, and I sit in the evenings by a window that looks at it, and I am not sad, and I am not remembering, I am listening, though there is nothing to hear this far up in the light, and Nora thinks it is peace, and it is not peace. It is the thing in me keeping the appointment my father kept before me, watching the water the way a man watches a road. He knows someone is going to come up eventually. And the boy. Children know. Not with words and not for long, because the world teaches them fast to stop knowing, but for a while when they are small they know. My son was 6 when I came home, and for the first year he would not be alone in a room with me. He was not afraid of me, the way a child fears a stern father. He was wary of me the way an animal is wary, a stillness that came over him when I came near, a watching, and once, only once, when he was 7 and half asleep and I carried him from the car to his bed. He opened his eyes and looked at me from 6 inches away with the terrible clear gaze of a half-asleep child, and he said, "You are not." And then sleep took him back before he finished it, and he never said it again. And by 8 he had forgotten how to know, and he grew up to love me the way a son loves a father, correctly, and he does not remember the year he was wary, and I have never reminded him, "You are not." He never finished it. I have finished it for him 10,000 times in the dark. You are not my father. You are not Emmett Rourke. You are not the man who went down. And the worst finish, the one that comes on the coldest nights, the one I cannot argue myself out of, because the whole shape of my life is the argument for it and against it at once. You are not, and neither was he. Neither was your father, in the chair by the window, watching the water. keeping the appointment. Neither was the gray, quiet man who raised you. I went to see the families. It took me 2 years to be able to do it, and the quiet men would rather I had not, and I did it anyway, one at a time, on my own money, because the man who went down would have done it, and I have spent my life doing what he would have done. It is the closest thing to a prayer I have. I went to Bell's widow first, in a small, clean house in Maine, with the sea a mile off, and the 2 girls were there, 12 and 9, in their school clothes, watching me from a doorway with their father's still gray eyes. And I sat in the front room and told their mother that her husband had put me in the sphere with his own 2 hands, and had done it without a wasted motion or a wasted word, and that he had thought of his crew to the last second of his life, and that the medal in the box the Navy sent her was a true medal, whatever else was not true. And she cried and thanked me and gave me coffee, and the whole time I sat there doing the correct thing with my face. One of the girls, the younger one, stood in the doorway and looked at me and would not come into the room, and when I got up to leave, she pressed herself back against the wall to let me pass, the way her mother did not see, and I did. And I understood that Silas Bell's daughter knew what her mother could not afford to know, and that she would forget it by spring, and that this was a mercy for her and a sentence for me. And I have sent that family a card at Christmas every year of my life, and the younger girl, grown now, a woman with children of her own, has never once written back, and I do not blame her, and I hope she does not know why she does not. I went to Kerr's people in Norfolk, a big, loud Scots-American family, that took me in and fed me and toasted the memory of their Amos, until I could hardly bear the warmth of it. And it was easier there because there were so many of them, and the grief was a shared thing spread thin over a crowd. And I told them about the plant he talked to and the way it ran better when he was down. And they laughed and cried and said, "Aye, that was Amos." And I left them a little healed, and myself a little worse, because Kerr had bought my minutes with his death, and had gone down swearing at the water like a man, and I had come up wearing a dead friend's rescue like a borrowed coat. I could not find Voss's parents. The boy had a mother somewhere in Ohio, and the trail went cold in a way that I later understood was not an accident, that the quiet men had folded the boy's family away somewhere quiet, and I hoped they were taken care of, and I fear they were only taken care of the way a loose end is taken care of, and I light a candle for Gideon Voss in a church I do not believe in, because a boy who walked calm and glad into the built light to learn how it worked deserves at least a candle from the one who watched him go, and did not stop him, and could not have, and did not. Wendell Straw had no one. That was the hardest of all of them, that the man who tried to save us, the man who knew, the old duck who had turned away twice in 50 years and turned toward it the third time only because he would not send the boy or leave his post, had no one on the whole surface of the earth to give his medal to, and so they gave it to me, along with my own, and I have 2 medals in a drawer I never open, and one of them is Wendell Straw's. And on the nights I sit by the window watching the water, I sometimes take his out and hold it, the cold weight of it, and I say to him the thing I could not say down there because it was not true yet and is true now. You were right, I did not answer it. Or I did, and I do not remember. And either way you were right, and I am sorry, and if it is any comfort to you wherever the light took you, I kept your minutes for every man but you, and I have counted them ever since. The years went by. No one tells a man this about surviving a thing like that. It does not stay at the pitch it reached. The body will not hold that pitch, and the years come and thin it out into an ache and a habit and a way of sitting by a window, and a man builds a life on top of it because that is what the living do, and I am in the ways that show among the living. I taught. They let me teach the quiet men. Once they were satisfied I would keep the oath, and I taught marine biology at a state college near enough the coast to satisfy the thing in me, and I was good at it, and my students loved me, and none of them ever knew that the professor who could make the deep sea come alive for a lecture hall had been to the bottom of it and left the best part of himself down there or brought the worst part up. My daughter was born and grew and married. My son grew and did not marry and moved inland, far inland. to the dry middle of the country where there is no water for 100 miles, and he has never said why, and I have never asked. And I think some animal part of him that forgot how to know still remembers enough to run from it, and I am glad, and I hope he runs far enough, and I am afraid it does not matter how far a man runs from a thing he carries in his blood. Nora died in the spring 3 years ago. I held her hand at the end in the hospital, and I did the correct thing with my face. And I grieved her. I did grieve her. Whatever I am, I grieved her. And at the very end, she was looking at me with the morphine taking her, and she squeezed my hand and she said, "It is all right, Emmett, and I have not been able to decide, and will go to my own grave." Not having decided whether she meant it is all right that I am dying, or it is all right, I always knew, and it did not matter. I loved you anyway, the both of you, the man who went down and the thing that came up, because to me you were only ever the weight of a hand in the dark and the sound of a man breathing in the next room, and that was enough. That was always enough. I would like to believe she meant the second thing. On my better nights, I let myself believe it. She was a better creature than either of the things I might be, and if anyone on this earth was wise enough and kind enough to have known and stayed and forgiven it without ever once letting on, it was Nora, and I hope I am not flattering my own need when I say I think she did. Hollis came back once, 11 years after, an old man by then, older than the trade should have let him get, and he found me at the college, in my office, at the end of a day, and he sat down across the desk the way he had sat by my hospital bed, and we were two old men in a small room with a thing between us that neither of us would name. He told me the program had never really stopped. He told me there had been other stations, before the Corliss and after, other floors, other deeps, that the thing under the vein deep was not the only one of its kind, that the ocean was full of even pulses, if a man knew the depth to listen at, and that the men up the wire had never stopped lowering good crews down onto them and ordering them to hold still and let the thing reach up, because the prize was worth it. The prize was always worth it, and he said the word prize the way a man says the name of a woman who ruined him. And then he told me why he had come. He told me they had lost another station recently, a new one, deeper, better built, and that it had gone the way the Corliss went, silent, all hands, except that this time, he said, this time 2 men came up, 2 rescue spheres, 2 survivors, from a station that should have killed everyone. And he looked at me across the desk with his old wet eyes and he said, "They do it correctly, Rourke. Both of them. Just like." And I understood that he had come to me, the first of us, the oldest of us, the one that got away and grew old and hurt no one that anybody could prove, to ask me a question that he could not put into words and that I could not answer, which was, what are they? What did we make? What have we been sending home to sleep in the beds of America for 30 years? And is it going to be all right? And I had no answer for him. I have never had an answer. And we sat in the little room until it got dark and neither of us turned on the light. 2 old men who had let a thing into the world and could not get it back. And then he stood up and put on his hat, and at the door he stopped. And without turning around he said, "For whatever it is worth, I am sorry." And he went out, and he died that winter. And I did not go to the funeral, because I did not trust what my face would do, and because some part of me, the cold part, the part behind and above, was glad. They are still down there. That is the last true thing I know, and the one I would most like to be wrong about. The thing under the vein deep is still down there in its built light, past the edge of the floor, even, patient, older than the idea of us, and it is not the only one. And the men up the wire are still lowering crews onto them because the prize is worth it. And every so often, from a station that should have killed everyone, 1 or 2 come up and do it correctly, and go home to families who cannot tell, and grow old by windows that look at the water, and raise children who are wary for a year and then forget how to know. And there is no board of inquiry that will ever write that down, and no file that holds it, and the sea has closed over all of it completely and without a mark, and forever. There is a thing under my skin. I have kept it for last, because it is the smallest of the signs, and the one I understand least, and because a man telling a story like this one has to be careful not to reach for a proof. And I am not offering it as a proof, only as the last of what I have. 14 years after the vein deep, I broke my arm falling off a ladder cleaning a gutter. An ordinary thing, an old man's accident, and they took a picture of the bone to set it. And the doctor who read the picture was a young man, and he came into the room with a puzzled look and put the film up on the light and asked me had I ever had surgery on that arm, and I said no, and he showed me. There was a shape in the film, in the meat of my forearm, alongside the bone, small, the size of a grain of rice. And it was not bone and it was not metal. It did not read the way metal reads. And it had an edge to it that was too regular to be a thing. The body grows on its own. The doctor wanted to take it out and look at it, and I let him, because I wanted to know. God help me, I still want to know. That is the last of the man who went down in me, that he still wants to know. And they cut it out under a local, and I watched them do it, and it came out on a little steel tray, and it was gray, and it was the size of a grain of rice, and it had corners. It had corners, the way the thing in the built light had corners. Small spans and angles that my eye wanted to slide off of on a thing the size of a grain of rice, sitting in a doctor's steel tray in a clean, bright room in the middle of America, 14 years and 9 miles up from the floor of the vein deep. And the young doctor turned it with the point of a probe and frowned at it and said he had never seen anything like it and would send it to the lab. And I asked him could I hold it first, and he said all right, and he tipped it into my palm, and I closed my hand on it, and it was warm. It had been in a steel tray in the open air of an air-conditioned room, and it was warm in my palm, warmer than my own blood. The way the phone had been warm, with a beloved voice. And when I closed my hand on it, I heard, not with my ears, in the deep water place behind and above my own eyes where I have lived since the sphere, I heard the 2 words, close and patient and glad. The way a man hears a thing he has carried against his own bone for 14 years, finally getting to say what it came up to say, come deeper. And then the young doctor was asking for it back. And I opened my hand and gave it to him, and it went to a lab, and the lab lost it, or the lab was made to lose it. A man in a plain suit I never saw made it lose it, because when I asked after the results, there were no results, and there was no record that anything had been removed from my arm at all. And the young doctor had taken a position at another hospital in another state, and could not be reached, and I understood that Hollis, or Hollis's sons, were still keeping their quiet eye, and had reached in and closed the small door I had opened, and that I would never know what the grain of rice was, and that this was the answer, that the not knowing was the answer, that I had carried a warm cornered thing against my bone for 14 years without knowing it was there, and it had known me the whole time, and had waited, patient, even, the way the thing in the deep had waited, for a ladder and a broken arm, and a young doctor, and a moment in the palm of my hand to say its 2 words to me again. I am very old now. My daughter comes on Sundays and brings her girl, my granddaughter, who is 4 this year, and they sit with me in the front room, and the window looks at the water, because of course it looks at the water. I chose this house for the window, the way my father chose his, and last Sunday, the child was playing on the floor with a set of wooden animals while her mother made the tea, and I was in my chair by the window, and the light was going down gold over the water the way it does, and I was doing what I do, which my daughter calls resting, and which is not resting, it is listening, and the child stopped her playing and stood up and came and stood in front of my chair and looked at me. She looked at me the way my son looked at me when he was small and had not yet forgotten how to know that stillness, that clear, terrible animal attention, and I looked back at her, and neither of us said anything, and her mother was in the kitchen, a room away, with the water running, and the child put her small hand flat on my knee and looked up into my face, and I waited for it. I have been waiting for it for 50 years, and she did not say, "You are not." She tilted her head the way a bird tilts its head at a sound below the floor, and she said, "Grandpa, why do you always listen to the water?" And I did the correct thing with my face. I smiled at her and I said, "Because it is pretty, sweetheart, the way the light goes on it." And she looked at me a moment longer with that clear gaze, and then she was 4 again. The knowing went out of her the way it goes out of them, and she went back to her wooden animals. And her mother came in with the tea, and the evening closed over the moment completely and without a mark, and no one knew. No one knows. That is the whole of it and the end of it. Nora is gone, who might have known and forgiven. My son is inland and has forgotten and is safe, or as safe as my blood let him be. The quiet men know a thing came up, but not which thing, and are dead or old or watching still and cannot prove it. My daughter thinks I am a gentle old man who finds the water pretty, and the child will forget by spring the way they all forget, and grow up to love me correctly, and someday sit by a window herself, maybe, if it is in the blood the way I fear it is. If the thing that came up the sphere put more into the world than one old man doing it correctly. I did not go deeper. I have held on to that for 50 years, the way a drowning man holds a spar. The sphere rose, and I rose in it, and the light fell away below, and the 2 words stopped at the ceiling of the deep, and I came up into the gray morning, the only living thing off Project Long Sound. I went up. Whatever went down into the hole in my time, whatever stood at the edge, where the floor stops, and answered or did not answer, the thing that came up went up, away from it, toward the light, toward Nora on the tarmac, and the boy on her hip. And 50 years of doing it correctly, by a window that looks at the water. But the water is patient. It has all the time there is. And on the coldest nights, when the house has gone cold around me and I have not noticed because I do not feel the cold anymore, I sit by the window and I look at the black water lying even and quiet under the last of the light, and I understand that I did not escape it. 14 years and 9 miles up, I only rose part way, that the rest of the rising is still to come, that a man who is called come deeper and goes up instead has only postponed the direction, and that the appointment my father kept in his chair by his window, the one he was watching the water for all those gray years, until the day he went to it at last, is mine now, and coming, and that when it comes, I will finally know the answer to the only question I have ever really asked, which is whether the thing that rises to meet the water at the end will be a frightened old man going home, or only the water coming back for the rest of what it left up here so long ago to finish rising. "Come deeper," my father said, on a dock, when I was 9. I can hear how patient it was. I could not hear it then, I can hear it now. The light is nearly gone off the water. My granddaughter's animals are still on the floor where she left them. In a while my daughter will call me for supper, and I will get up out of this chair and I will do the correct thing with my face, and no one will know. No one has ever known. That is the mercy, and that is the horror. And after 50 years I have stopped being able to tell them apart.